It was supposed to be the city's new home for doing business, so how did an empty downtown high-rise become San Diego's latest money pit? Who should provide health care to San Diego's jail population? Why the sheriff wants to take it out of the public's hands? And the novelty is worn off, feeling the burnout of working from home during COVID-19. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me on a remote version of the Roundtable today are reporter Jesse Marks, a Voice of San Diego, Kelly Davis, senior editor at the news website The Appeal, and reporter Brittany Meiling, who covers business for the San Diego Union-Tribune. The former headquarters of Sempra Energy at 101 Ash Street downtown sits empty these days, but that fact has nothing to do with telecommuting office workers amid the pandemic. It has become a hulking white elephant of a building costing the city of San Diego tens of thousands of dollars in rent each day. The city's 20-year lease-to-buy deal for $127 million makes 101 Ash Street the latest disaster plaguing the city's real estate assets division. Joining me to discuss how a cash-strapped city got saddled with one dubious real estate deal after another is Jesse Marks, associate editor at Voice of San Diego. Jesse, welcome to the Roundtable.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Well, give us an overview of this deal for the former Sempra Energy building. First, when and why did the city acquire the building?
So back in 2014, 2015, Sempra, which as you mentioned was the tenant in this building, the building's across the street from City Hall, Sempra was looking to move into new headquarters. So the owners of that property needed to figure out what to do with it. So they came up with an idea to pitch the city on this piece of property. The city needed to house its workforce long-term. It had hundreds of people who it needed to put into long-term office space. And frankly, the current office space that it was occupying was deteriorating. So long-term, it seemed like a good idea. The deal finally came together in 2016, though, because the original owners of the property couldn't get it done, but then there was another developer who came back and essentially negotiated with the city. So you had an interesting kind of three-way sort of developer city official project in the works, and that's kind of what went wrong with this process.
Yeah, that go into that brokering a little bit. That was really kind of odd, and you had kind of 1 foot in each camp among the brokers, right?
Yeah, so you essentially had the owners and then you had a middleman. And so you had these different developer real estate groups, and then you had the city as the tenant. And the deal was the city would come in and lease the space for 20 years. And then at the end of the time, they would own the building. So essentially their rent payments were going to be like a mortgage, just spaced out over 2 decades. But what happened was the city didn't do its homework up front. So they wound up agreeing to buy a building over a 20-year period without actually independently appraising or assessing the true condition of the building. So once they got inside it, they realized that there was a lot more going on than they had bargained for.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing. I mean, any of us have bought a house or a commercial building. It's just routine, a condo. You have it inspected. And the city was told, and leaders apparently accepted, that a mere 10 grand, power wash the building, that's it. The employees can move right in. Instead, what was actually wrong with the 101 Ash building?
Plenty. They got inside in early 2017 and they said to their architects, hey, take a look at this, come up with a space plan, which was their way of basically saying, figure out how we're going to house hundreds of workers inside this framework here. So it wasn't until the architects and the engineers actually took a closer look at the building that they realized the HVAC, the plumbing, the electrical, the lighting, and the ceiling, it all needed major work. So going into the deal, when it was pitched to the city council in 2016, the city had just taken the word of the developers, and the developers had turned over documentation for the condition of the building. But the problem was much of those reports were based just on visual inspections. So the city didn't look very deeply at what the true condition of the building actually was. They just relied on what the developers told them.
Now, the city has an entire department for this, a department overseeing hundreds of buildings, properties totaling billions in dollars. Why didn't the city do its own inspection up front?
That's a great question. We've gotten a lot of different answers, but essentially the city has just conceded that they dropped the ball. They didn't have the expertise to really do a deal like this. They hurried into it. The owners had given them some limitations on when they needed to close the deal. So they said within only a few months, we took their disclosure documents and we essentially took it at face value.
It's a really amazing story. And you and your colleague, Lisa Halverstadt, reported this week that a second top city manager, quote, resigned in the wake of the Ash Street building disaster. Who was she and whose head was the first to roll over this deal?
So she was Sibel Thompson, and she was the head of the real estate assets department for the city. She'd been there for a couple of years. She'd been brought in to kind of clean it up because it had had some problems. But she herself is strongly implicated in some of the internal investigations that we've seen over the last few days. And she's primarily the one who should have been responsible for getting an independent assessment of the property, but didn't get it. So she resigned effective Wednesday, I should say. And she was the second public official that we know of who was connected to this project who's been forced out. The first was her supervisor, who was a city manager named Ron Villa, who also helped pitch this project to the city council and sell it to the city council on the belief that it was a move-in ready project. It would save the city money over the long term, and it was in good condition.
And Mayor Kevin Faulkner has responded. He faced the city council. But what was Faulkner's response regarding Ash Street?
Faulkner's had a really interesting response to this. He's tried to spin it to his advantage by saying, look, we made mistakes. We didn't have the expertise in place that we should have. But you know what? We're gonna clean this mess up. Even though it went haywire under his watch, he's blamed a culture at City Hall of mismanaging properties and then trying to sweep the problems under the rug. So in response to this, he's downplaying the culture that he's presided over, but at the same time, he's saying, look, I understand it's my responsibility now to share information with the public and propose corrective actions to get at the root of the problem. And the root of the problem, frankly, was that his real estate people didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, the real estate assets division is really in the spotlight on this one. Well, let's talk about a couple of other kind of doozy deals the city's entered into. There was the former skydiving facility and a fire truck maintenance yard that's yet to see any fire trucks.
Yeah, so the skydiving, it's an indoor skydiving center. The city purchased this a couple of years ago, and the plan was to convert it into a homeless housing navigation center. It didn't open until almost 2 years later, and it now turns out that the city is going back and getting an independent appraisal on what the property is actually worth, because there have been some suggestions and complaints that they paid too much for it. And so in that case, again, they didn't do an independent appraisal of the site before they went ahead and bought it. And the second piece of property that you're referring to is it's a separate site. It's in Kearney Mesa, which the city began leasing in 2017. And the idea was it was going to be a fire truck maintenance yard, but it's yet to actually service any fire trucks at this point in time.
Mayor Faulkner leaves office after the upcoming elections. Will this be the major cloud over his legacy?
That's a good question. I mean, Faulkner has sold himself as being this he's a businessman who's going to come in and he's going to run like an executive and he's going to run a clean and efficient ship. And so on the one hand, it's going to be a hard sell if these projects have all gone haywire or have had problems under his watch. It's going to be hard for him to say that he's done an effective job at managing like an executive. He could obviously and is saying, look, I'm rooting out and detecting problems and I'm solving those. So, give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm doing what I can with the circumstances. But I think more importantly, I'm kind of skeptical that anyone will think very long term, or voters will remember, let's say, if he decides to run for governor in a couple of years, that he botched some real estate acquisition deals. I think for you and I, Mark, these things are very important because of what they say about our local city government and how it operates. But I think voters have a short memory, frankly. And if he does run for governor, like I said, on a statewide level, I don't know if it's a very potent argument to make against him. Maybe
the best thing that ever happened was the Chargers left town and we're not in the middle of a pandemic economy with on the hook for that whole stadium that they were talking about, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Exactly.
Especially since football probably wouldn't be played this year. Well, yeah. I've been speaking with Jesse Marks, Associate Editor at Voice of San Diego. Thanks very much, Jesse.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Jail is not meant to be a pleasant experience, but it is supposed to be a humane one. The incarcerated are due certain rights, including access to health care. It's something we all pay for, and now the county is taking steps that could change who provides medical and other services. Proponents say it will save taxpayers money. Critics say it opens the door to reduce quality care from companies motivated by profit. Joining us is Kelly Davis, Senior Editor for The Appeal. Kelly, welcome back to the Roundtable.
Hi, thank you.
This is a story closely reported by local media this week. What's the takeaway from the decision by the County Board of Supervisors?
Well, just for quick background, there were two sort of competing proposals on Tuesday's Board of Supervisors agenda relating to inmate health care. And the one that prevailed allows Sheriff Bill Gore to take the first step toward outsourcing jail medical and mental health services. It's called a request for interest. And then the other proposal was by Supervisor Nathan Fletcher, who wants the county's Health and Human Services Agency to be the ones responsible for inmate health care and to create a more cohesive system. Gore argued that he has the sole authority over jail operations. So this is his decision to make. But I really think it came down to the Board of Supervisors, minus Nathan Fletcher, not wanting to rock the boat, and a yes vote on Gore's proposal was an easy decision because it's not committing to outsourcing, it's just committing to this very preliminary step.
Right. So the idea is just to open this up, field bids and ideas and proposals from various people. We're not really signing anything on the bottom line right now.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, the county already contracts some services to a variety of private companies. How would this proposal by the sheriff supposedly streamline that approach?
Well, it would bring everything kind of under one umbrella. So there would just be one provider handling, medical care, dental care, mental health care. Though Fletcher's proposal would do the same. All the services would be provided through the county's Health and Human Services Agency. So it's all about kind of just having one entity responsible for these services.
Part of the public comment this week came from public workers assigned to jails. One said she believes the Sheriff's Department regularly overrides their recommendations, generally doesn't value their work. How does that tension add to this situation?
So this is something that I have heard from multiple people who work in the jails in my reporting. Mental health clinicians, medical staff, they say that their expertise isn't respected by sworn staff, by deputies and higher ups in the Sheriff's Department. They say they're not listened to when they make a recommendation for an inmate. And this is something that has played a role in a number of inmate deaths where you see deputies making medical decisions and they're the wrong decisions. So it definitely frustrates the folks who want to have more of a say in how to change the system, how to make it better, how to make it more responsive. They say that they're not being allowed to make those recommendations.
Now, KPBS Midday Edition also spoke with Union Tribune reporter Jeff McDonald on this earlier this week. You've worked with Jeff on a number of stories regarding the jails. Of course, that's available on the Midday Edition podcast, that interview. Now, the Sheriff's Department might not be pleased with all the coverage that this issue is getting. Why did it recently cancel its Union Tribune subscription?
Jeff and we've reported extensively on issues in San Diego jails. So in early June, we started hearing from inmates, family members of inmates, jail staff, that the Sheriff's Department had canceled its subscription to the Union Tribune. The newspapers used to be delivered to jail modules, and Jeff and I would get stacks of letters. Every time we wrote a story, we would get all these letters from inmates who read our stories and wanted to share their experiences. And sometimes we'd reach out to them, we'd meet, we'd go visit them in jail, interview them, and that would be, sources for subsequent stories. I guess the department didn't like that or didn't want to reward the Union Tribune by continuing to subscribe to it. So they canceled the subscription. I asked the Sheriff's Department spokesperson why. I never got a response. I hear that they now get USA Today is the newspaper.
Maybe they like the comics better in USA Today. Let's shift the discussion to your work for The Appeal. Tell us more about that platform and its mission.
Yeah, so it's a nonprofit news organization focused on criminal justice issues, and and all the things that are intertwined with the criminal justice system, homelessness, drug addiction, racial justice. They have a great team of reporters who live throughout the U.S. The stories are fantastic examples of investigative reporting, and I'm really excited to be working for them. Their website, if I could plug that, it's theappeal.org.
Now, is there a particular story or what's on your radar here? What's got your eye looking forward that you're looking into?
So I was hired specifically to work on a project writing about coronavirus in jails and prisons. So those outbreaks are continuing. It's an ongoing problem. These places are overcrowded. Social distancing is impossible. Testing is really slow. People are dying. There's lots of efforts to get folks released who are eligible for release. So big issue, one that I don't see going away anytime soon. And, it's something people should be paying attention to, because with jails, folks cycle in and out of jails. So you want your jails to not be kind of, a hotbed of any sort of illness.
A lot to look at, a lot to explore, a lot to write about going forward.
Yeah.
Well, I've been speaking with Kelly Davis, senior editor for The Appeal. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Mark.
¿Qué onda, friends? In this edition of Port of Entry, we are telling the story of Charles and Giancarlo, two compadres who recently put together a graphic novel titled The Fracture. Along with this podcast episode, we are premiering Port of Entry Shorts, small video capsules of the stories we put together, and we have two to share. Catch us wherever you get your podcasts. Nos vemos pronto!
Many people are simply grateful to still have a job during COVID-19. But while many of us working from home have saved money on gas and eating out, maintaining healthy routines can be a challenge when the structure of the office is lost. After nearly 5 months, one reporter for the San Diego Union-Tribune decided it was time to get back into an office and re-embrace the commute. Brittany Meiling covers business for the UT and joins us to talk about finding a work-life balance in the age of COVID. Brittany, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Well, your story this week, it's a personal one about working from home, and the downtown newsroom at the UT is off limits now with the pandemic. Why do you feel you had to find a setting outside of your home?
Honestly, I feel like we could talk for your entire show just on that one question, because I think it's very there's lots of reasons, but I'll try and narrow it down to just a couple, which is that I found that the working from home setting for me contributed to a lot of bad habits. I think that a lot of people set up a structure around physical spaces. So for me, I would always pack a healthy lunch. I would make sure I only had healthy snacks available at the office. I would work out at the gym across the street from my office during lunchtime. And being in those physical spaces was like my trigger to do those things. It's like I set up these bumper rails for my behavior. And working from home, it was just, 10 hours of your day in one space. And so then at the end of that time, I kept feeling this need to get out of my apartment. And I found myself consistently going and grabbing takeout, junk food, and, not having the motivation to work out because I didn't want to just work out in my living room again. And I definitely think there are people who were different. They're like, I go and I do calisthenics at the park. But I'm just not that person. I found myself doing things that were unhealthy instead. So it was about structure for me.
For those who might be interested in doing something like this, how expensive is it? This is kind of a leasee's market, right?
It definitely is. And I didn't get into full detail in the essay that I wrote, but right now it's very affordable compared to what it once was. You see some private offices going for as low as like $350. Depending on the part of town. Some of those even come with parking spaces if you're in an area like Mission Valley or maybe La Mesa or Vista. And then there are some spaces that you could pay upwards of $2,000 for a private space. So it really depends on if you're looking at a co-working type building or sublease of a commercial real estate building that used to be occupied, by an office, a company. So I would say anywhere between $350 and over $2,000 a month.
all depending, like anything else you're choosing, whether it's a home, apartment, or an office. So you're commuting again? You're actually embracing the commute?
Yes, I am. And that's one point of kind of contention with a couple of readers where, you should be embracing the fact that you don't have to drive and, contribute to pollution. And I definitely understand that point of view. But for me, the commute it's short. I've always only had like a 10, 15-minute commute. And it provides this kind of trigger for me of separating the home brain and getting into the work brain. I always listen to the news on the way in or my favorite podcast. And when I arrive to work, I'm just in a different headspace. So I've always enjoyed a commute.
And you cover business and startups for the Union Tribune. Many workers in that sector also use co-working. But how has this area been hit by COVID-19? Is there more of a demand from people who otherwise lost their normal location?
It's kind of interesting because no, I think right now they're in a really kind of a difficult spot, not just co-working, but commercial real estate. You have a lot of companies, most companies that are not in their space and they've decided maybe to abandon their space altogether. So they're trying to get out of leases or when their lease came up, they went ahead and just said, yeah, we're not going to re-sign. So you have a lot of open square footage available for sublease. And for co-working, that was kind of even a worse position because this was all set up around community and shared spaces. Right now, most people do not want that. And so I talked to several co-working companies that said their occupancy was way down, 75%, 90% down, just lots of empty spots at these spaces.
Yeah, so it sounds like from what you're describing, a lot of this model is broken. We see all sorts of office buildings and spaces downtown, for example, other places in the county that are congregated. What happens if suddenly they're not needed anymore? Do they become housing or some other purpose?
I think that's a really fascinating question right now is how will our communities look different? Because obviously we all know that housing is a real need in our community. So the natural thought is, well, they should all convert to housing. But in the past, it's always been, you have to have a certain mix in a neighborhood for it to be successful. Developers want to have a certain amount of offices so that people have jobs in close relation to their apartments. And there's also that like live, play, retail, park spaces, that kind of stuff. You want all of it in one space. So if you have some neighborhoods that just become a bit of ghost towns for a while or don't have the right mix, I think you might see this phase in between while redevelopment happens around our new needs, where you go into neighborhoods that feel very empty. I think right now, a lot of places where there's a high concentration of offices feel pretty desolate right now.
Right, and maybe this pandemic will be the catalyst to kind of jump forward what we've been talking about for years, which is a big push to telecommuting in our whole business model in the United States. Do you think that's the case here? Is this going to be a permanent thing? I mean, you touched on the idea that we might get a benefit out of all this from not commuting, and of course we've seen fossil fuel use go down because of so many people not driving to work.
I think it will require some additional changes because I actually believe that we are wired for a few things that the current telecommute model does not serve very well. And one example of that is humans need community. And for a lot of people, especially younger generations, you're seeing that places where they used to find community, like church, for example, that has dropped in popularity with younger generations. And kind of one of the last physical places that younger generations get community is the workplace. And so if the model changes and everything's remote and we're all kind of isolated at home, I'm not sure that it's going to work without seeing a change. Like maybe more businesses pop up that focus on connecting people in physical spaces. I really think that there's some changes before that's going to be a really permanent change.
And you've been in your new space a couple of weeks. Let's bring it back around personally. How has it improved day-to-day life? I hope it has improved it.
It's improved it immensely. In fact, I don't think I touched enough on that in the column that I wrote. It's only been a couple of weeks, and so, it's hard to say for sure. But as far as my mental health goes, it's significant improvement. I feel a lot more energized. I feel like I've been a lot more productive and active in the meetings that I've had with my publisher or editors. And at the end of the day, when work is done, I feel more a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment. And then I can kind of walk away from that and just be someone else at home, like just be, with my husband and have dinner and have that kind of rejuvenation time as well.
Wow. Well, work is work and home is home. Now, you touched on some response from readers about, why are you embracing the commute again? What other kind of response did you get from your story?
I honestly could not believe it. I have never written something from the first person before account, and I was really nervous to publish it. I thought, who am I to have any kind of complaint over the last few months? I've kept my job and my paycheck. I haven't gotten sick. I haven't lost any loved ones. And it felt like writing a piece that was kind of emotional and kind of like, this has been hard. This last 5 months have been hard. I felt guilty about it. And when I shared it, I felt like I'd get a lot of negative response. And instead, I've been overwhelmed. I mean, 99% of the responses have been people saying, I feel the exact same way. I feel like I haven't been able to talk about it or put it into words, and feeling like they really related. I've never written a story that got so much written response, like emails and direct messages and comments. And so I feel like it struck a nerve with a lot of people who kind of felt like they couldn't talk about it themselves.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. And maybe a whole nother story for you there to get some of those voices into the newspaper.
Definitely.
Well, I've been speaking with Brittany Meiling, business reporter for the San Diego Union-Tribune. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
That wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Jesse Marks of Voice of San Diego, Kelly Davis of the news site The Appeal, and Brittany Meiling of the San Diego Union-Tribune. If you ever miss our show, you can catch up with the KPBS Roundtable podcast on your favorite podcast app. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for being with us today, and join us again next week on the Roundtable.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.